You had a plan. Maybe it was a business you spent years building. Maybe it was a relationship you poured everything into. Maybe it was a career path, a dream, a goal so big it kept you up at night, not from anxiety, but from excitement. And then, it fell apart. Not slowly. Not gradually. It collapsed. All at once. And now you're sitting there, maybe literally right now, watching this, wondering how something that felt so certain could just disappear. I want you to know something before we go any further. What you're feeling right now. That heavy, suffocating mix of shame, confusion, and exhaustion. That's not weakness. That's not a sign that you weren't cut out for this. That's what it feels like to have genuinely tried. To have put something real on the line. And here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody likes to say out loud. You cannot get to where you want to go without going through exactly where you are right now. Now, I need to be straight with you about what this video is, and what it isn't. This is not a video where I tell you that everything happens for a reason, that the universe has a plan, or that you just need to stay positive and the clouds will part. You've heard that before. It didn't help. This is a rebuilding guide. A practical, honest, step-by-step look at what happens inside your brain when you fail, why it's so devastatingly hard to learn from it, and most importantly, what you can actually do to get back up and move forward with something more powerful than what you started with. Because here's what the research actually tells us, and this is the part that stops most people cold when they hear it. Failure doesn't just hurt. It actively works against your ability to recover from it. Your own mind throws up walls, emotional walls, cognitive walls, that make it harder to see the lesson sitting right there in front of you. It's not a character flaw. It's psychology. And once you understand it, you can beat it. So whether you failed publicly or privately, whether the world saw it or only you did, whether it happened yesterday or it happened years ago and you're still carrying it, this video is for you. Stick with me for the next 30 minutes. By the end, you won't just feel better. You'll have a real framework for what to do next. Let's get into it. Let's start with a question that sounds simple but almost nobody stops to actually ask. Why does failure hurt so much? Not just emotionally. Not just the embarrassment, the disappointment, the sleepless nights. I mean, why does it feel like it reaches all the way down into who you are as a person? Why does a failed business feel like a failed human being? Why does a collapsed relationship feel like proof that something is fundamentally wrong with you? Because it isn't random. There's a very specific reason this happens. And when you understand it, the pain doesn't disappear, but it loses its power over you. Scientists and psychologists who study failure have identified two distinct categories of barriers that failure throws up inside your mind. Two invisible walls that stop you from recovering, from learning, from moving forward. The first is the one everyone talks about. The second, almost nobody does. And it might be the more dangerous of the two. Let's break them both down. The first wall, the emotional barrier. Here's what happens the moment you fail at something that matters to you. Your brain doesn't just register a poor outcome. It doesn't simply file it away as, "That didn't work, let's try something else." Instead, it launches an immediate threat response, the same kind of response your body uses when it senses physical danger. Why? Because failure threatens something your brain is wired to protect at almost any cost, your sense of self-worth. Think about that for a second. Your brain treats a failed project the same way it treats a threat to your physical survival. It goes into defense mode. And when it's in defense mode, it is not in learning mode. This is why, after a major failure, people tend to do one of three things. They avoid thinking about it altogether. They rewrite the story in their head to make themselves look better than they actually did. Or they disengage completely, convincing themselves the goal wasn't worth pursuing in the first place. None of those responses involve learning. None of them involve growth. They're all just protection. And what's heartbreaking is that this protection feels completely rational in the moment. It feels like self-care. But it's actually self-sabotage wearing a disguise. Here's a real example of how powerful this emotional barrier actually is. Researchers ran a study where participants played a learning game. They were shown symbols from an ancient script and had to guess what each one meant. When they guessed wrong, they received clear feedback telling them the correct answer. When they guessed right, same thing, clear feedback confirming what they got right. Both groups had access to the exact same information. Both groups had the exact same opportunity to learn. But the group that received negative feedback, the ones who failed, retained dramatically less information afterward. Even when researchers raised the financial reward for getting it right. Even when they explicitly told participants which answer was wrong. The emotional sting of failure was so powerful that it overrode the learning process almost entirely. And these were adults in a controlled setting who had every reason to pay attention. Now imagine what that same barrier is doing to you in real life, after a real failure, with real emotional stakes. The second wall, the cognitive barrier. Now here's the one nobody talks about. And this one is sneaky, because it doesn't feel like fear. It doesn't feel like shame. It feels like logic. The cognitive barrier is this: your brain genuinely believes that failure contains no useful information. When you fail, your mind looks at that experience and concludes, almost automatically, that there's nothing worth examining there. Success feels informative. Success tells you what to repeat. But failure just feels like noise. The problem is that this conclusion is completely wrong. Failure is actually packed with information. In many situations, a failure tells you far more than a success ever could. Think about it this way: when you succeed, you know one path that works. But when you fail, you eliminate an entire approach, narrow down the possibilities, and get closer to the answer through a process of elimination. The researchers who study this describe it simply: there are far more unique paths to failure than to success. Which means each failure you experience is genuinely distinct, it carries information that your previous failures didn't. But your brain doesn't see it that way. Your brain looks at failure and says, nothing to learn here, move on. And so you do. And the lesson stays buried. The trap at the bottom, learned helplessness. When these two barriers, emotional and cognitive, pile up over time, something even more dangerous can happen. Psychologists call it learned helplessness. It's what happens when someone has failed repeatedly, or experienced repeated negative feedback, and eventually concludes, deep in their nervous system, not just in their thoughts, that nothing they do will make a difference. That outcomes are beyond their control. That trying is pointless. You've seen this in people. Maybe you've felt it yourself. That quiet, exhausted resignation that doesn't even look like giving up anymore, it just looks like not starting. And the devastating part is this: those people aren't lazy. They're not weak. They're not unmotivated. They learned the wrong lesson from their failures. Instead of learning what didn't work, they learned that nothing works. Instead of eliminating one approach and trying another, they eliminated themselves from the game entirely. So here's where we are. Failure hurts because your brain treats it as a threat to your identity. It puts up emotional walls that block you from processing the experience clearly. And at the same time, it puts up cognitive walls that convince you there's nothing useful to take away from what happened. And if that cycle repeats itself long enough, you stop trying altogether. That is what you're actually up against. Not bad luck. Not a lack of talent. Not some fundamental flaw in who you are. You're up against your own mind. And that, unlike luck, unlike circumstances, unlike other people's opinions, is something you can actually change. Which is exactly what we're going to talk about next. So now you know what's happening inside your brain when you fail. You know about the emotional wall that makes failure feel like a personal attack on your identity. You know about the cognitive wall that tricks you into believing failure holds no useful information. And you know how those two walls, stacked on top of each other over time, can quietly drain a person of all their willingness to try. But here's the turning point. Because everything we just talked about, every single one of those barriers, they are not fixed. They are not permanent features of who you are. They are responses. And responses can be changed. It starts with one thing: the meaning you give to failure. Think about two different people who both fail the same exam. Same test. Same score. Same outcome. The first person looks at that result and thinks, "This proves I'm not smart enough. I don't belong here. Maybe this whole path isn't for me." The second person looks at the exact same result and thinks, "I clearly haven't put in enough work yet. I need to study differently and try harder." Same failure. Completely different meaning. And because the meaning is different, everything that follows is different. The motivation is different. The next action is different. The outcome, eventually, is different. This isn't just motivational thinking. This is backed by research on how people actually process setbacks. And the difference between those two responses has a name: fixed mindset versus growth mindset. You've probably heard these terms before. But I want to go deeper than the surface level version, because most people understand the concept without actually applying it when it counts, which is precisely in the moment right after a failure. A fixed mindset is the belief that your abilities, your intelligence, your talent, they are what they are. You were born with a certain amount, and that's your ceiling. Under this belief system, every failure becomes evidence. Evidence that you've hit your limit. Evidence that you're not enough. A growth mindset is the belief that your abilities are not a fixed point, they're a starting point. That dedication, effort, and the willingness to learn can develop what you were born with into something far greater. Under this belief system, failure becomes data. Not judgment. Data. And here is the critical part that most people miss. Your mindset isn't just a personality trait. It's a habit of interpretation. And habits can be retrained. The researchers who study this found something fascinating about how experts handle failure compared to beginners. Novices, people who are new to something, tend to use failure as information about their commitment. When they fail, they ask themselves, "Do I even care about this? Am I really cut out for this?" And when the answer starts to feel like no, they disengage. They walk away. Not because they couldn't have succeeded, but because they interpreted failure as a signal about their identity rather than their effort. Experts do the opposite. They use failure as information about their progress. When they fail, they ask, "Where am I falling short? What do I need to do more of? What do I need to do differently?" The failure doesn't shake their sense of self. It just recalibrates their plan. So the shift you need to make, the most important cognitive move in the entire rebuilding process, is this. Stop asking, "Am I enough?" after failure. Start asking, "What does this tell me about where I need to go next?" The self-distancing technique. Now, knowing this intellectually is one thing. Actually doing it in the raw, painful moments right after a failure is another challenge entirely. Because in those moments, your emotions are loud. Logic is quiet. And the emotional wall we talked about earlier makes it almost impossible to think clearly about what just happened. This is where a technique called self-distancing becomes genuinely powerful. Self-distancing is exactly what it sounds like, mentally stepping back from yourself, creating a little psychological space between you and the experience, so you can look at it more clearly without the full force of the emotional impact. And the simplest, most well-researched version of this technique is almost embarrassingly straightforward. Talk to yourself in the third person. Instead of saying, "Why did I do that? I always mess things up. I don't know if I can recover from this." You say, "Why did your name do that? What can your name learn from this?" What would your name tell a good friend in this situation? It sounds strange. I know it does. But the research behind it is remarkable. When people use third-person self-talk after a failure, they experience significantly less negative emotion. They process the experience more objectively. And they are more likely to identify the actual lessons buried inside the setback, rather than just spiraling in the pain of it. The third-person inner voice exercise. Here's how to actually do this. Not in theory, in practice. Right now, or the next time failure hits. Find a quiet moment, even 5 minutes. And write down or say out loud, in the third person, answers to these 3 questions. 1. What happened to you? Describe it factually. No drama. No self-attack. Just the facts. 2. What did you do that contributed to this outcome? Not to assign blame, but to identify what's actually within your control. 3. What would you tell yourself to do differently next time? What's the one thing, just one, that could change the outcome if you tried again? That third question is where the rebuilding begins. Because the moment you can answer it, even partially, even imperfectly, you have shifted from being a victim of your failure to being a student of it. And that shift changes everything. Reframing failure as lack of progress, not lack of worth. There's one more reframe I want to give you before we move into the practical steps. And this one is perhaps the most important of all. When you fail, your mind will try to tell you one of 2 things. It will either say, you failed because you don't care enough. You're not committed. This isn't really for you. Or it will say, you failed because you haven't gotten there yet. You're not done. You need to keep going. The first interpretation drains motivation. The second fuels it. And the beautiful thing is, in almost every real-world failure, the second interpretation is far closer to the truth. You didn't fail because you're the wrong person for the goal. You failed because you're not finished becoming the right person for it yet. That's not a small distinction. That is the entire difference between someone who quits and someone who ultimately succeeds. So say it clearly, to yourself, right now. This is not a verdict on who I am. This is feedback on where I need to grow. Now that your mind is in the right place, it's time to talk about what you actually do. The concrete, practical, step-by-step actions that take you from the ground back to your feet. That's exactly what comes next. It's called counterfactual thinking. And despite the academic-sounding name, it's actually something your brain does naturally. You just need to learn how to direct it productively instead of letting it spiral destructively. Counterfactual thinking is simply asking, what if? What if I had made a different decision at that moment? What if I had prepared differently? What if I had asked for help sooner? What if I had noticed that warning sign I ignored? Now, here's where most people go wrong with this. They use what if as a weapon against themselves. They replay the failure over and over, torturing themselves with every alternative outcome, every road not taken. That's not counterfactual thinking. That's rumination. And it does nothing but deepen the wound. Productive counterfactual thinking is surgical. It's specific. And it's forward-facing. Here's how to do it correctly. After a failure, sit down, physically sit down with a pen and paper, and ask yourself these exact questions. First, what was the single decision point that, if different, would have most changed the outcome? Not 10 decision points. 1. The most significant one. Second, what information did I not have then that I have now? In other words, was this failure partly a result of ignorance rather than incompetence? Because those are very different problems with very different solutions. Third, what would I tell someone else to do if they were in my exact situation 6 months ago? What advice would I give them? That third question is particularly powerful, and it connects directly to step 4, which we'll get to shortly. The research on this is clear. People who deliberately generate counterfactual thinking after a failure are significantly more likely to change their behavior in productive ways going forward. They don't just feel bad about what happened, they develop a concrete, causal understanding of why it happened. And that understanding is the raw material of every comeback story you've ever been inspired by. Because here's the truth about every person who ever rebuilt from a major failure: they didn't just get lucky the second time. They understood specifically what went wrong the first time. And they changed it. Counterfactual thinking is how you build that understanding. Use it deliberately. Use it surgically. And use it to look forward, not backward. Step 3. Set small goals, rebuilding your momentum from scratch. After a significant failure, one of the most common and damaging mistakes people make is trying to go from zero to everything overnight. They feel the urgency of having lost time. They feel the pressure of starting over. And so they set enormous goals, make sweeping declarations, and try to rebuild in one dramatic leap, only to fall again, harder, and with even less confidence than before. Don't do this. Momentum doesn't work that way. Confidence doesn't work that way. And your brain, the same brain that's still processing the emotional weight of what just happened, is not ready for enormous leaps. It needs small wins first. Think about what a small win actually does psychologically. When you set a goal that is achievable, genuinely, realistically achievable within a short time frame, and then you achieve it, your brain registers a success. Not a massive success, but a real one. And that registration begins to quietly, incrementally rewrite the narrative that failure has been telling about you. It says, I set a goal. I reached it. I am someone who can do that. That's it. That's the whole mechanism. And it works even when the goal is small. Even when nobody else would be impressed by it. Even when it feels almost embarrassingly modest compared to where you want to eventually be. The size of the goal does not determine the size of the psychological impact. Completion does. So here's what step 3 actually looks like in practice. Take the larger goal, the rebuilt version of what you're working toward, and break it into the smallest possible meaningful unit. Not the whole staircase. Just the next step. Then take that step. Fully. Completely. And when you've done it, acknowledge it. Don't rush past it. Don't immediately pivot to the next thing. Let your brain register, that happened. I did that. Then take the next step. This is not a slow process because you lack ambition. This is a deliberate process because you understand how momentum is actually built. Not in grand gestures. In consistent, completed actions. And here is what happens over time. As the small wins accumulate, the goals you're capable of setting begin to grow naturally. Your confidence isn't manufactured. It's earned, one completed step at a time. And earned confidence is the only kind that holds up under pressure. Step 4. Give advice to others, the surprising recovery technique. This is the one I promised would surprise you. And I want you to stay with me on this one, because your first instinct is going to be resistance. When you're in the middle of rebuilding from failure, the last thing you feel qualified to do is give someone else advice. You feel like a fraud. You feel like the last person anyone should be listening to. You feel like you need to get your own life together before you could possibly have anything useful to offer someone else. That instinct is completely understandable. And it is completely wrong. Here's what the research actually shows. In a series of studies, people who were struggling with significant personal challenges, financial difficulties, self-control problems, motivational slumps, were divided into 2 groups. One group received expert advice on how to handle their situation. The other group was asked to give advice to someone else facing a similar challenge. The group that gave advice, the group that felt least qualified, least confident, most uncertain, showed significantly greater motivation, greater confidence, and better outcomes than the group that received expert guidance. Let that sink in for a moment. Giving advice, when you yourself are struggling, is more powerful than receiving it. Why? 2 reasons. First, the act of giving advice forces you to organize your thinking. When you sit down to tell someone else what they should do, your brain retrieves everything you've learned, through struggle, through failure, through the hard experience of living through it. And in the process of articulating that knowledge for someone else, it becomes clearer and more actionable for you. Second, giving advice rebuilds something that failure devastates: your sense of competence. The moment you help someone else navigate a difficulty you understand, even imperfectly, even while you're still navigating it yourself, you remember that you have something to offer. That your experience has value. That you are not simply a collection of your worst outcomes. So what does step 4 look like practically? It doesn't have to be formal. It doesn't require you to set up a coaching practice or start a YouTube channel. It can be as simple as a conversation with a friend who's going through something difficult. A comment on a forum where someone is asking for help with a challenge you know intimately. A message to a colleague who's about to make a mistake you've already made. Find one person who could benefit from what you've learned through your failure. And share it with them honestly. Not from a position of having all the answers, but from a position of having walked through the fire and having something real to say about what it's like on the other side. You'll be surprised how much that helps them. And you'll be even more surprised by how much it helps you. Step 5. Build a safe environment, the role of psychological safety. The 5th and final step moves outward. Beyond your own mind, beyond your own habits, into the environment you surround yourself with as you rebuild. Because here's something that doesn't get talked about enough in conversations about bouncing back from failure: it is nearly impossible to rebuild in isolation. Or worse, in an environment where failure is treated as something to be hidden, ashamed of, or punished. The research on this is unambiguous. Environments that foster what psychologists call psychological safety, where people feel genuinely free to take risks, admit mistakes, ask questions, and share what went wrong without fear of judgment or humiliation, produce dramatically better learning outcomes and dramatically faster recovery from setbacks. Psychological safety doesn't mean surrounding yourself with people who tell you everything you do is wonderful. That's not safety, that's insulation. And insulation prevents growth just as effectively as fear does. Real psychological safety means being in spaces, whether that's a relationship, a team, a community, or even just a single trusted friendship, where failure can be discussed openly and honestly. Where the question after a setback is not, whose fault was this, but, what can we learn from this? Where mistakes are treated not as character verdicts, but as data points. So as you rebuild, ask yourself honestly, who are you rebuilding around? Are the people closest to you the kind of people who can hold space for your failure without making it mean something permanent about you? Are they the kind of people who can say, "That didn't work, and that's okay, now let's figure out what will"? If yes, lean into those relationships. They are one of your most valuable resources right now. If no, that is not a small problem. The environment you rebuild in will shape the person you become on the other side of this. Choose it carefully. Seek out communities, mentors, and relationships where failure is treated as part of the process, because it is. It always has been. So there they are. 5 steps. Not 5 easy steps, 5 honest ones. Accept the reality without fusing it to your identity. Extract the lesson through deliberate counterfactual thinking. Rebuild momentum through small, completed goals. Give advice to someone else who needs what you've learned. And build yourself an environment where rebuilding is actually possible. These are not 5 things you do once and check off a list. They are 5 practices. Things you return to, layer by layer, as you move forward. Some days you'll be deep in step 2. Other days you'll feel step 3 carrying you. Some weeks step 4 will save you when nothing else does. Trust the process. Work the steps. And keep moving. We've talked a lot about what happens inside your own mind when failure hits. But I want to take a moment now to zoom out. To look beyond your own experience and into something that researchers have found to be one of the most quietly powerful tools in the entire recovery process. It's called vicarious learning. And in plain terms, it simply means this: you can learn from watching other people fail, sometimes even more effectively than you learn from failing yourself. Now, here's why that matters so much in the context of rebuilding. When you fail personally, all those barriers we talked about rush in immediately. The emotional wall goes up. The cognitive wall goes up. Your brain goes into protection mode, and suddenly the very experience that contains the most useful information for your future becomes the hardest thing to look at clearly. But when you watch someone else fail, those walls don't go up. There's no ego threat. There's no identity at stake. Your brain can observe the experience with a level of clarity and objectivity that it simply cannot access when the failure belongs to you. This is why stories of other people's failures are not just inspiring, they are genuinely instructive. They give your brain access to the lessons of failure without the emotional interference that makes your own failures so hard to learn from. The science behind it. Researchers tested this directly using the same learning game we mentioned earlier, where participants had to identify symbols from an ancient script. When people failed themselves, their learning dropped dramatically. They retained far less than those who had succeeded. But here's what changed everything: when participants simply watched someone else go through the same experience, when they observed another person fail and receive feedback, they learned at virtually the same rate as those who had watched someone succeed. The failure, seen through someone else's experience, lost its power to block learning entirely. Think about what that means for you right now. Every story of failure you expose yourself to, every honest account of someone who hit the ground hard and found their way back, is not just motivation. It is a lesson your brain can actually absorb, clearly and completely, in a way it struggles to do with your own experience. Those who fell before you. So let's talk about some of those people. Not in a highlight reel way. Not the sanitized, social media version of, "I failed and then immediately succeeded." The real version. The messy, unglamorous, genuinely difficult version. Because the truth about every person you admire, every person whose success looks effortless from the outside, is that there is a failure story underneath it that most people never see. Consider the inventor who conducted thousands of failed experiments before finding the one approach that worked. He didn't reframe each failure as a step toward success because he was naturally optimistic. He did it because he had trained himself to see failure as information, as the elimination of one more path that didn't lead where he needed to go. Each dead end wasn't a defeat. It was data. Consider the athlete who held one of the greatest records in sports history for decades, and who, almost nobody mentions, also held one of the greatest records for striking out. He understood something fundamental, that the willingness to fail publicly, repeatedly, and visibly was not a flaw in his approach. It was the engine of his success. You cannot hit without swinging. And swinging means missing, a lot. Consider the researcher who spent years being told her ideas were wrong, her conclusions unfounded, her work not worth publishing. Who faced professional rejection and personal doubt in equal measure. And who kept refining, kept questioning, kept going, until the work that had been dismissed became the foundation for how millions of people understand the human mind. These are not exceptional people in the sense of being somehow immune to failure. They are exceptional precisely because of how they responded to it. They did not treat failure as a verdict. They treated it as a variable. Something to be examined, adjusted, and tried again differently. And here is what connects all of them, what connects every person who has ever rebuilt from something that felt unsurvivable. They were willing to look at the failure directly. To sit with it. To extract what it was trying to tell them. And then to use that information to try again. Not blindly. Not recklessly. Deliberately. With more knowledge than they had before. With a clearer map because they now knew exactly where one of the wrong roads led. The culture of sharing failure. There's one more dimension to this that I think is worth naming. We live in a world that is obsessed with sharing success. Social media feeds are filled with wins, with milestones, with carefully curated highlights. And there is nothing wrong with celebrating success. It matters, it inspires, it should be shared. But the near-total absence of honest failure from public conversation creates a deeply distorted picture of what progress actually looks like. It makes people feel that their struggles are uniquely shameful, that everyone else is moving forward while they alone are stuck. Research bears this out in a striking way. When teachers were asked to anonymously share either a professional success or a professional failure with a colleague, as a source of wisdom, the overwhelming majority chose to share a success, even when the failure would have been equally, or more, instructive for the listener. We hoard our failures. We polish our successes. And in doing so, we accidentally make it harder for everyone around us, and for ourselves, to learn from the very experiences that contain the most valuable lessons. So here is a quiet challenge I want to leave with you as we move into the final section of this video. At some point, not today necessarily, not publicly if that doesn't feel right, consider sharing your failure with someone who could learn from it. A friend. A colleague. Someone coming up behind you who is about to walk the same road you already walked. Not to perform vulnerability. Not for applause. But because the lesson your failure taught you, the specific, hard one, lived-in lesson that came out of your most difficult experience, is genuinely valuable to someone else. And in the act of sharing it, something remarkable tends to happen. You stop seeing yourself as someone who failed. And you start seeing yourself as someone who learned something that matters. Someone whose experience has worth. Someone who came through something and has something real to say about it. That shift, from failed to learned, is one of the most powerful quiet transformations in the entire rebuilding process. And it happens not in isolation, but in connection. We're almost at the end. And in the final section, I want to bring everything together and leave you with the one thing you can do today. Right now. Before this video is even finished. Let's close this out. We've covered a lot of ground together. And I don't want to summarize all of it, because you were here. You heard it. It's already inside you, working on you, whether you realize it yet or not. But I do want to bring it back to one single point. The one thing that separates every person who successfully rebuilds from failure from every person who doesn't. It's not talent. It's not luck. It's not connections or resources or timing. It's the decision to treat failure as a teacher rather than a judge. That's it. That's the whole thing. A judge looks at what happened and delivers a verdict. Final. Fixed. Defining. A teacher looks at what happened and asks a question. What can we learn from this? What do we do differently next time? Where do we go from here? Every single tool we talked about today, reframing your mindset, using counterfactual thinking, building momentum through small wins, giving advice, creating psychological safety, learning from others who fell before you, every single one of them is just a different way of making that same fundamental shift. From judge to teacher. And I want to acknowledge something honestly before we close. That shift is not always easy. There will be days when the failure feels too big, too recent, too raw to look at clearly. Days when the emotional wall goes up so fast you don't even realize it's happened. Days when the old story, I am someone who fails, feels more true than the new one. On those days, you don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need to be further along than you are. You just need to do one thing. One small thing. So here is what I want you to do. Not someday. Not when you feel ready, because waiting until you feel ready is how months turn into years. Today. Pick up a pen, or open a note on your phone, and write down the answer to this single question. What is one thing I learned from this failure that I didn't know before it happened? Just one. It doesn't have to be profound. It doesn't have to be the complete lesson. It just has to be honest. Because the moment you can write down one thing you learned, the moment you can look at the experience and find even a single piece of genuine information inside it, you have already begun. You have already taken the first step from the floor back to your feet. That is not nothing. That is everything. I said at the beginning of this video that the challenge isn't to prevent failure. We cannot stop the inevitable. The challenge, the real, worthy, lifelong challenge, is to make sure that when failure comes, and it will come, you are someone who can learn from it. Not someone who is immune to the pain of it. Not someone who pretends it doesn't hurt. But someone who refuses to let the pain be the only thing the experience leaves behind. You fell. That is real. That happened. But you are also here. Watching this. Thinking about what comes next. Willing to ask hard questions and do difficult work. That tells me something important about you. The bigger the fall, the more you have learned. And the more you have learned, the stronger the foundation you are building on right now. Don't waste what this failure taught you. It cost too much to leave the lesson behind. If something in this video landed for you, if one idea, one reframe, one step gave you something you needed today, I'd genuinely love to know which one. Drop it in the comments below. Not for the algorithm. Because those comments become part of what we talked about in the previous section, the honest sharing of experience that helps someone else who is watching this video 3 months from now, at their lowest point, trying to find their way back. Your comment might be the thing that reaches them. If you're not subscribed yet and you want more content like this, honest, research-grounded, no-fluff conversations about the things that actually matter, hit the subscribe button. We go deep here. And there is a lot more ahead. And if you know someone who is going through something hard right now, someone who is in the middle of their fall and doesn't yet know how to begin getting up, share this video with them. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do for someone we care about is simply hand them the right words at the right moment. You've got this. Not because it's easy. Not because the path forward is clear. But because you now know something you didn't know when you pressed play. And that is always, always, enough to begin.